Do you ever feel like you have two competing personalities when it comes to learning Spanish? Like there are two Spanish learners inside you, a tortoise and a hare. The hare wants to exert big efforts all at once, to make giant leaps of progress in short periods of time, maybe to memorize 2,000 words in a few days, or to master using all the top Spanish verbs and pronouns in just 1 week. This half of you accomplishes amazing things in short periods of time and then takes breaks. The tortoise, meanwhile, doesn't feel like doing a lot at once. Instead, it wants to make slow and steady progress day by day, maybe by learning one new word or phrase a day and spending the rest of its time reviewing and practicing all the Spanish that you already know. This half of you wants to chug along consistently, but not very fast. And normally, between the two of these, the hare gets all the attention. Those big breakthroughs feel great because you can easily see how much you've learned and you can celebrate. This is super motivating, and if you've spent any time working on learning Spanish, you know how important motivation is for getting you moving. But the fact is, according to science and our own experience working with thousands of coaching students, it's not those short bursts of progress that will lead to long-term fluency. And they also won't be great at keeping you motivated to do the hard work of becoming fluent. Let's talk about the research of why the tortoises will always win at long-term Spanish fluency. First of all, according to research on how we learn, spreading your learning out instead of learning in cramming sessions is actually the best way to maintain everything you learned for the long term. And paradoxically, you'll even learn faster by taking the slow and steady route. How does this work? Part of it comes down to the science of short-term memory versus long-term memory. Have you ever crammed for an exam at the last minute, aced it the next day, and then forgotten basically everything you learned just a week or two later? This exact thing is actually the subject of a lot of research. The book Make It Stick is basically a compilation of scientific studies on learning written by 3 researchers. The book describes how short-term cramming feels rewarding for a reason, but it also has basically no long-term benefits. When you learn in short, intense bursts, you spend a lot of your time practicing things that are new to your memory, and you become really adept at these things, but specifically in your short-term memory. When you do practice like this, your brain doesn't have to do much work of digging things up because everything you're working on is fresh and new. And it feels great. You feel like you're a sprinter running along freely, learning and practicing lots of things that become easier and easier over this short period of time. The problem is that when learning is quick and easy, it actually doesn't go into long-term memory. And that's because of the importance of something called reconsolidation. Basically, reconsolidation is what happens when you learn something, wait a little while, start to forget it, and then try to remember it again. Trying to remember something that you learned a week ago takes effort, and it's this effort specifically that strengthens a memory and helps turn it into long-term learning. But this might not feel nearly as fun because our intuition plays tricks on us. We usually feel like we've learned something better when it's easier. If you have to use lots of effort to remember something that you learned a week or two ago, it feels difficult and it feels counterproductive, like trying to turn the crank on a rusty device. However, despite what our intuition tells us, turning the crank on a rusty device is one of the most productive things you can do for long-term learning. If you give enough time that a little bit of forgetting sets in between practice sessions, the things that you practice will become permanent more quickly. And obviously, this strategy does take a lot of time. You'll have to wait between study sessions so that forgetting starts to set in. That's how this strategy works. But as paradoxical as this sounds, learning more slowly like this is actually the fastest way to fluency. You may not be convinced. I imagine that if you've ever taken a Spanish boot camp or given yourself an intense short-term challenge, you probably look back on that as one of the most productive times that you ever worked on Spanish. If you personally haven't done something like that, go ahead and try to picture it. So imagine that you're about to sign up for a Spanish class and you have 2 options. Option 1 is a week-long Spanish boot camp where you get to learn Spanish intensely in the classroom for 5 days. Option 2 is a 6-month Spanish class with daily assignments and frequent spoken practice, but you only get FaceTime with the instructor once or twice a week. Go ahead and let your imagination run wild with option 1. How rewarding would that bootcamp feel in the short term? Just for fun, I'll go ahead and sketch out what one of the days in the bootcamp might look like and feel like. So let's say that on the 3rd day of Spanish camp, you get to spend 4 hours learning how to have a Spanish conversation about your favorite book. It might go something like this. At 1 p.m., right after lunch, you learn some of the words and phrases that you need to talk about this book. At 2 p.m., you learn how to describe the synopsis to your classmates in Spanish. At 3 p.m., you participate in a Spanish Q&A about various aspects of the book. By 4 p.m., you find that you're able to have a 10-minute conversation about the book entirely in Spanish. This will feel like an enormous breakthrough, all in just an afternoon. Wow, if you can get such huge gains in such a short period of time, this strategy must be the fastest way to fluency, right? But research shows that the opposite is true. If you work on Spanish all day, every day, for 5 days, you will feel those feelings of enormous progress. But the fact is that most likely those gains will be very fleeting. You'll lose most of your progress within a week or 2 after the bootcamp. When you get home, the motivation that you felt during that bootcamp will vanish. You're back in your normal home environment, in your standard daily patterns, and in the end, what happened at Spanish camp will probably stay at Spanish camp. Now let's picture option 2, the 6-month course. This one will feel slow and difficult. Each week, you will have forgotten some of what you practiced the previous week, which can be frustrating. For example, maybe you're meeting with a Spanish coach once a week, and for 2 weeks in a row, your coach asks you to talk in Spanish about your favorite book. Of course, by the time a week has gone by, you've forgotten some of what you practiced 7 days ago. When you try to use the same words and phrases that you used last week, it'll give you that feeling of trying to turn the crank on a rusty device. In the moment, you'll wish that you'd been practicing this thing in the minutes and hours before the call, not a whole week ago. But again, this is exactly what the research says leads to stronger, long-term learning. When you practice a thing that you've almost forgotten, it's a clear signal to your brain that this is not a temporary thing to practice and then forget. It's a skill that you're going to maintain for the rest of your life. And this slow, steady learning works. You'll be doing this reconsolidation, this turning the crank on a rusty device on a daily and weekly basis. It's the reliable path to long-term fluency. But what about motivation? This is an objection that many students have. Slow and steady progress just doesn't sound motivating. The idea of a short, intense burst of learning is much more appealing because it's easy to stay motivated for a week or 2. But learning slowly and consistently for a year or more? It doesn't sound nearly as fun. But just like the research on slow and steady learning for long-term learning is counterintuitive, there's also something counterintuitive about motivation. If your goal is to keep going all the way to fluency, you're actually more likely to stay motivated by working in small, daily chunks rather than grand, sweeping, accelerated classes or cram sessions. You may find this surprising because, on the surface, short-term, quick gains feel more motivating than long-term, slow gains. I can definitely feel this skepticism myself. The idea of boosting my fluency in 1 week sounds much more motivating than the idea of being stuck in a slow, consistent study routine for several months. But believe it or not, one of the most important elements of motivation is actually momentum. If you want to get motivated and stay motivated for the several months that it will take you to be fluent, then the best way to nurture this motivation is actually with consistent daily progress. Most Spanish students think that motivation comes first and the momentum will come afterwards. But for serious students, this is actually backwards. If you're about to sit down and start studying Spanish one day, you shouldn't start out by trying to feel out whether you're currently motivated enough. It's the other way around. If you're in the habit of doing a little bit of Spanish work every day, the momentum of those study habits will increase your motivation slowly but consistently. Let's think for a second about all the problems with the alternative of thinking that motivation has to come first. If you think that you need to feel this immense passion before you start working on Spanish, what are you going to do on a bad day? A day where you just don't have a lot of positive feelings towards Spanish? I mean, maybe sometimes you've felt those passionate moments of what feels like divine inspiration to do big bursts of work, but that's simply not something to count on. What if instead you nurture your overall motivation daily, building a solid foundation via the momentum of daily work? This is how your motivation will grow steadily on a solid foundation all the way to fluency. So in a nutshell, despite our gut reactions and intuitions to the ideas of these two scenarios to pick from, there's a clear winner. The slow and steady route will lead to better long-term learning and more meaningful, enduring motivation that'll carry you through all the way to fluency. So what's the best way to get started on the steady, reliable path to fluency? My recommendation is to check out the Spanish in 1 Month challenge, which thousands of Spanish learners have used to kickstart their lifetime learning of Spanish. The Spanish in 1 Month challenge is a sort of boot camp, but it's different from any other boot camp. It's designed entirely around the idea of getting your momentum started, momentum that you'll be able to maintain for years all the way to fluency. With 20 bite-sized lessons and difficult but doable assignments, this course will have you mastering the top 100 words of the language, focusing on essential grammar and the skills that'll endure. This isn't some quick and easy cram session. You'll be doing the hard work of learning the language, but it will get you more motivated than ever and set you up for a lifetime of fluency. Check out the link in the description of this video for more info. And make sure to subscribe to this channel for more very practical tips for making your Spanish study as productive as it can be so that you can be fluent faster than ever.